is Marjean Allen, and Marjean is kind of new to Mesquite, Nevada, and she came in here and she has just been a wonderful volunteer for Friends of Gold Butte. She's going to talk to us tonight about something called work camping, and I didn't know it was a thing, but it is. And she has done it for several years and is quite well versed in it and is happy to share her knowledge with us this evening. So, as she said, I'm Marjean Allen, and I'm going to go over some information about work camping. I'll have a time place at the end to ask questions. I don't know if I'm capable of looking at chats, but we'll give it a try. So things that I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences throughout the things. I love talking about me. We'll go over what is work camping, who can do work camping, what equipment and skills you need to do work camping, how to decide where to apply, what kind of opportunities are available, how to find out about those opportunities, and what to ask during an interview. All about me. I am an only child, so that explains all about me. So I'm a retired nurse practitioner. I retired early because I just couldn't take it anymore. I've been work camping for the past 7 years. These are some different places that I work. I'm originally from Utah. I lived in Ventura area of California for about 12 years, and then I retired early and moved into my RV and I started work camping. I also lived with friends and family who were very generous to me. So I appreciate them. What I like about work camping, probably my favorite thing, whoop, I went too far, is I get to drive these cool little vehicles. Every campground has had a different vehicle. So I've even driven a Prius as my my campground vehicle. I like to be outdoors and I like to be active. It's a good thing for me to work because otherwise I don't like to get out of bed. So I love meeting people, especially national parks, because they're just so many diverse people that are in national parks and national monuments from throughout the world, and they're all different. They all have great things to share. And the staff at national parks and monuments and just campers in general are just really nice people. And so it's fun to talk to them and get to know them and share things. Volunteering especially gives me a sense of purpose. I was raised to be a volunteer. My mother was a volunteer, and so it's just sort of something I have to do it. So I am pretty good at telling people what to do and bossing people around. As the Park Service puts it, I should provide education, not boss them around. So I do try to do that. A fun thing to do with work camping is you can learn the history and geology and about the community for an extended amount of time. And it'll give you free time to explore the area in depth. Instead of just paying 1 or 2 days in a national park, you get to spend like 3 months there and really get to know the place. So what is work camping? This is the description that Wikipedia gives. This is a pretty good description. Usually you could receive compensation for work camping in the form of a free campsite, or you may be paid wages, or you may be paid both. There's a variety of things that you can do as a work camper. The picture of me is cleaning up the horse corral at Pipe Spring National Monument. So I got to shovel horse doobie, whatever. I can't use that word that I really want to use. So anyway, that was pretty fun. Not, but it was an experience that I never got to do. Who can work camp? You can be single. I'm single. Be couples, you can be families. I don't see a lot of families in national parks or monuments, but I certainly know that they're out there, perhaps more in paid positions or private areas. And it depends on the work site requirements. A lot of sites may require that there's couples because they feel like there's more work to do or for safety reasons. As a single, I really haven't had a problem finding any positions. What do you need to work camp? Mostly, I think you need to go with the flow attitude. You can't, if you expect things to be organized and efficient and everything, it's just not going to be, no matter where you work camp, especially if it's a government agency. And that's not necessarily because it's a government agency. It's just usually people that work in national parks, monuments, state parks, they're usually short-staffed. They hire people at the beginning of the season and then half of them quit. So they're usually doing 2 jobs. They've got a lot to keep track of. So you do need most likely an RV and a good working order. This can be a travel trailer.
be a a regular RV, a Class A or Class B, Class C. It's nice to have your own bathroom and not have to run out to the bathroom to use it with all the other campers if you're camp hosting. If you're staying in doing something other than camp hosting, you may not have that opportunity where there's a public bathroom in the area. You may have to have a self-contained unit. I find it's really helpful to have a way to get to town and explore. So I have a small car that I tow with my RV. Having a four-wheel drive might be nice because usually, especially here in the West, you need a four-wheel drive to get on some of the roads. The good communication skills are important. You have to remember you're an educator, not law enforcement. So basically just share, like, no, you need to have your dog on a leash for the dog's safety and everybody else's, and not yell at them about it, though I'd like to sometimes. You have to remember you're not really paid enough to argue with people, especially if you're a volunteer. And the most important thing is the ability to answer the same question over and over and over again. Mainly, what is there to do and where's the bathroom? So having decent health is important. I'm not in the best of shape, but being able to walk, especially if you're in high altitude, being able to survive high altitude is important. But you don't have to be a camp host or most volunteers. You don't have to be in great physical backcountry shape. A lot of places will require a background check. So if you're working for the government, these can be pretty tedious, but it does save your information. Just be prepared to share your life. So if you're thinking, I'd kind of like to do this, I wonder where I should apply. You need to know where you want to be. Do you want to be in the West? Do you want to be in the East? Do you want to be in the South or the Northeast, Northwest? Do you want to be paid, or do you want be in a crowded or isolated place? I find like RV parks that you pay to stay in that are private are usually more crowded. That kind of drives me nuts to have people right next to me. Some places that you may volunteer, you may be in the middle of everything nowhere. So you need to know what kind of climate you're interested in. Can you handle the cold? Can you handle the heat? In Colorado, I was at 9,000 feet, and in September, we had 6 inches of snow, and it got down to 2 degrees. So kind of have to be prepared for everything. Again, that goes with the go with the flow attitude and just look at it as an adventure. Probably should think about what resources do you need close by. Do you need health services frequently? Do you need to have a health condition you need to be seen frequently for? Do you need law enforcement, or are worried enough about your health that maybe you need to want to make sure that there's emergency services that can get to you quickly rather than an hour and a half? How far do you want to drive for groceries and laundry? My favorite question is, where's the closest Walmart? My limit's kind of 2 hours to drive to Walmart, and it's a little far away, but most Walmart's within 2 hours of most places. So is there other places to visit? Is it most places in the West here, if you're at a national park or a monument or even in an RV park, there's plenty of things to see around there. You want to know what the road conditions are and if there's cell or internet reception. These are all things that may help you decide whether you want to apply at a place or not. Some of these things may be covered in the job description, and these things can also kind of give you a guide to what you want to ask for your interview. So an example of this is, I looked at working at Chaco Canyon, which is in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, had a terrible road going into it and was at least an hour from any grocery store of any size. And there really wasn't I don't know if you're familiar with Chaco Canyon, but it's on the Navajo reservation. And so there isn't a lot in that area to sightsee at. So I decided not to apply for that position mainly because I didn't want to drive my RV and car over that road more than once. So I went down, looked at it, and I was like, no, this isn't for me. So it's just something to consider. So I broke this down into 2 types of work camping positions, paid and volunteer. So we're going to cover the paid first. This picture I took off Vista's website. They're a concessionaire that's campground host, manages campgrounds in a lot of national forest areas. So some types of work camping positions, usually these are things that are owned by someone or a company or an individual or a family. These are things like concessionaires in national parks and national forests, private RVs, and resorts like the big ones that are in down in Arizona, where a lot of people stay for the winter. Maybe some here, like in Mesquite, where people come and stay for the winter. Lodges, resorts, tour companies, seasonal government jobs. You can work remotely. You can work in retail. You can work in restaurants. And again, most of these are seasonal things. So maybe if there is a local population, they probably don't want to be working seasonally, or there may not be enough people in the area to work seasonally. So they bring in people to work. I've seen advertisements for ranch and farm workers, event staffing, gatekeeping, mainly in Texas. That does not look like a fun job to me, but there's people that do that. So most paid jobs are 32 to 40 hours a week. You may or may not be paid for the hours worked, or they may or may not include an RV site. Sometimes you can work for a company that'll pay you both hourly wages and pay for your site. Some will deduct the site from your hourly wages. Some will just provide a site. Usually, if you're just working for a site, it's fewer hours, like 24 or so. You kind of have to look at that as if that's worthwhile to work for or not, just to get a site for 24 hours. Some of it is what you may want to consider more as dirty work, like cleaning restrooms, doing maintenance, landscaping, yard work. You can also work at the front desk, checking people in. So one of the resources I found best if you want a paid job is Workamper News. This is a website that was developed several years ago, and they actually are the people that coined the word work camping. Website's workamper.com. They do charge a membership fee to have full access, and depending on how much money you spend, depends on how much access you get to the website. They did have a 30-day free membership the last time I looked at their website, which may be worthwhile to check out just to see what's on the site if you have a lot of questions. They do have a lot of education stuff on there. They have a resume builder, which is helpful. I've posted my resume on there and actually had employers contact me to see if just interview me and talk about their positions. And like I say, they have a lot of information about interviewing, finding a job, employer reviews. So if there's a big company that a lot of people have worked for, you can kind of check out the employer reviews and see if that's something that maybe you'd like to do. This is just a sample of what one of their education things is, like all these questions that you can ask about a site. And I'm not going to go through all those, but it's just information. So they're pretty detailed. Some free websites that have work camping jobs that are paid on them is Camper Jobs and workcampingjobs.com. There's also Indeed.com you can put in to find camping jobs. I noticed that a lot of these websites had a lot of advertisements on them other than work camping. So they were a little frustrating for me, but they are a good resource. Anyway, KOA is another option. Their website is down right now. I tried to look it up and it's under repair. I did get on this website when I was looking for paid jobs, and you had to pay to get onto the website, which I thought was a little weird, to look for a job with a company and you have to pay to look for a job. So I didn't really like that, but it may have changed. I haven't been on there for several years. Then when I tried to look it up, it wasn't available. But that's a big company and it has a lot of different subsidiaries to it. So that's a good resource if you want a paid job. So if you want a seasonal federal job, the best place to go is USA Jobs. These are for like federal agencies. These are paid jobs. They're seasonal. They also advertise full-time jobs on here. So you kind of have to know what you're looking for and play around with it a bit. So these are things like you can look for fees, park guides, which are interpretation rangers. They're the information rangers, maintenance jobs, forest technicians. They're the guys in the national forest that run around and clean bathrooms and take care of sites and do a lot of maintenance and things. I did work with a lady at Great Sand Dunes who was in her 70s, and every summer she applied for a job as a fee technician. And she would just travel around every summer, leave her husband at home and go work in a national park for the summer, which was great for her because it's a short time gig. So if she didn't like the people or didn't like the job, it's only for 3 or 4 months and she could leave. I talked to gentleman ranger at Pipe Spring National Monument, where I spent 2 summers as an interpretation volunteer. His name's Ian Harvey. He's a great guy. And he gave me this information on usajobs.gov. So it's not accurate, blame Ian. So some things he mentioned was to be flexible, especially like looking for a job. You may, and this goes for volunteering too. You may be easier to find a job in a lesser known park or monument than a really busy park or monument like Yellowstone or Yosemite, because a lot more people are applying for those jobs than applying in a smaller, lesser known area. It's okay to call a person on the listing if you have a specific question. However, there's this fine line of being a pest and taking the initiative. So you kind of have to walk that line because people generally don't like pests. So response time, if you put in an application, can vary. They may respond in a few weeks. It's not going to be right away. Nothing, especially with the government, is right away, or they may never respond. So you can contact the hiring manager if you haven't heard anything, or send an email, see if they can tell you what's going on. They may or may not have housing for you or an RV site there, especially for seasonal positions, and you will have to pay for that site. And housing like at national parks and monuments and the Forest Service and stuff, it's not glamorous housing. So, and they charge the prevailing rate of the area. So it can even be kind of expensive for not glamorous housing. You'll probably need a background check. If you're applying for a summer job, they usually post those jobs in the fall. So you may want to get on and start looking in about August or so. You can create an alert so that they'll send you job alerts if for specific criteria. I asked about key phrases because when I was looking at the website, it was kind of hard to narrow it down on what I wanted to look for. So Ian suggested starting with like a broad thing, like the agency you want to work for, like the National Park Service or the Forest Service, or a location, like you want to look for jobs that are in Utah. You can also look for jobs like our rangers, park guides, speed technicians, that type of thing. But you have to know what kind of jobs they're available to enter that as a keyword. He suggested applying early and often and keep your resume and information updated. One thing I always found interesting that he would tell people is that at least the National Park Service likes long resumes. They want to know everything. If you're doing like for a private company, usually it's just 1 or 2 pages. They want long ones. And the website also has help centers that may give you some good tips on how to apply. Another thing that I found interesting when I was just looking around is that the National Park Service has a program for temporary experienced workers that are over 55. And this was for people that did like maintenance, construction, engineers. So it'd basically be a seasonal job doing real work instead of just talking to people. So that'd be pretty cool if you just weren't quite ready to retire, but you didn't want the normal everyday things and it's just for the season. So if you don't like it, you're done in a couple of months. Concessionaires, these are people that have contracts to operate in like a national park or during an event. So like the picture shows spring training. I worked for Aramark there, and they had the concession for that ball field in Surprise, Arizona. Usually these are paid positions. I've also seen Aramark advertise for stock shows in Houston, where they just want people to come in and work the event. In that case, I had to find my own RV spot near Surprise, Arizona, which was not easy during the spring's training session because everybody's there. Campgrounds have concessionaires, retail, hotels, guest services. They may or may not provide an RV site or housing for you. Some of the bigger parks do have employee housing for concessionaires. Guide services are concessionaires. So like horseback trips, river running trips, that type of thing. They need people to come work for them. So some examples are like Vista Recreation, Aramark. I think also Aramark is a concessionaire in Mesa Verde, or it was at one time. Delaware North runs some businesses up in Yellowstone. Xanterra is a concessionaire who runs the lodge in Zion. Which is interesting about concessionaires is that they don't own the property necessarily. They just run the business, and they have to rebid on those businesses every couple of years. So I know in Yosemite, they had a really big problem when the concessionaire got kicked out and a new concession came in, and they changed the names of the lodges and everything. And it was, when I was living in California, that was a big deal. You can look for hotels and resorts, gift shops, bookstores, food service, so grills, restaurants, whatever's in the national parks or monuments or wherever. Bus drivers. So if there's like river running trips, may need bus drivers or transportation people to let people off and then go pick them up at the end of the river trip. Campgrounds, there's a lot of concessionaires that run campgrounds in the Forest Service and national parks. You can do a website for the specific site or call the agency. So like if you want to find out who runs the campground in the national forest where you go and you think, oh, it'd be fun to go spend the summer up there and work the campground, and you can't figure out who it is, I would either talk to the camp host if possible, or just call the local Forest Service office and ask them. So if you're looking for a national park concessionaire, you can do a Google search for National Park Service concessionaires. That's how I found it. And it comes up with this website. And then you can put in a specific place that you want to look to see who's the concessionaires there. So I just put in Bryce Canyon, and it came up the Bryce Canyon Natural History Association and Lodge at Bryce Canyon, which is actually Forever Resorts-AZ. Unfortunately, this doesn't give you the website, which is a little frustrating. But then you can do a Google search for Forever Resorts-AC. I wanted to talk a little bit about bookstores and gift shops that are like inside the visitor centers. Those are usually run by a nonprofit organization. So like Zion Forever runs the bookstore in Zion National Park, Pipe Spring National Monument, and Cedar Breaks National Monument. And there's other ones, like this one says Bryce Canyon Natural History Association runs their bookstore in Bryce. So there's different ones for different parks, but usually those profits are returned right back to the park in either the form of grants or services. So I know like at Pipe Springs, Zion Forever helped pay for our animals. They help pay for the animal feed, and they even help pay for the ranch hand that took care of the animals. So I always would say, if you're going to shop there, try to shop in the bookstore that's run by the organization that supports the park. So there's different types of work camping positions as a volunteer. You can work for government agencies. You can work for state parks, county parks, city parks. Some of these are paid positions also. You can work for religious and service organizations. They may have like retreats, meditation centers, specialty camps. And you can be a camp host, work in the visitor center, work in interpretation. They also call those park guides now. Living history, maintenance, trail roamers, preventative search and rescue. I think preventative search and rescue, they like stay at a trailhead and make sure everybody's got all their water and equipment before they hit the trail. Trail roamers, like at Capitol Reef, they had volunteers that actually walked all the trails periodically, or hiked different ones that are really busy to make sure people were obeying the rules in an education form. Telling people like they had a dog on a trail that didn't allow a dog, and they would suggest to them that they take their dog back to the car. And generally you have a radio with you, and you can call for backup or law enforcement if they're being rude and won't do it. So you don't need to get in an argument with them. So we'll look at the different agencies, how you can find a position with them. Most of these positions, unless it's just for a one-day event or a special thing, they can run from 1 to 6 months. I've done 3 months to 7 months at different positions. So it depends on what they need. When I worked in Colorado for 7 months, they didn't have a lot of people applying for that position. And I was at a position where I was like, I was just happy to have a place to land. So it worked out that I could just spend all summer there. Generally, I find 3 months is long enough, though, as a camp host to try to get tired of people. You want to change. So BLM is one of these agencies. When I went on their website, they just automatically sent you to the volunteer.gov camp host positions. some trail maintenance, maybe some maintenance, but they just referred you basically to volunteer.gov. And I'm going to go over volunteer.gov when we're done. The Fish and Wildlife Service, this would be an interesting agency to work for, I think. They do have a volunteer page that listed opportunities. It was a little hard for me to find it, but I finally found the page that had a keyword search, and I just clicked on search on that box that said keyword search, and it listed all their opportunities. So these are jobs like in fish hatcheries, visitor centers, trail maintenance. It's not so much campground jobs. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So working a fish hatch. The Forest Service, they have a volunteer page, which referred you right to volunteer.gov, or they suggested you can contact your regional liaison or just your local office. They may pay a stipend for some positions. When I volunteered for the Forest Service at my first camp host job, they paid me $40 a day, which at the time was pretty good because I needed money. And I don't know if they still do that now. That was like about 6 or 7 years ago. They also have some interesting things that I didn't realize besides camp hosts and visitor centers work, is that you can work with specialists. And I would probably contact the local office to find out about this. So you can work with like a botany specialist that may need assistance doing study, or archaeologists looking at a site, or a wildlife specialist. So that'd be, if that's your specialty area, that might be a fun place. Army Corps of Engineers also looks for volunteers. They just go, their volunteer button just goes right to the volunteer.gov website. And these are positions, usually camp hosts or centers, maybe cleaning or maintenance, and they're usually at reservoirs. So there's body of water around. Then there's the National Park Service, which is what I like volunteering for. And they also have recreation areas, national monuments. They list all their jobs on volunteer.gov. So we're going to talk about volunteer.gov, which is where you can find a lot of web information. This just shows their opening page. These are just some sites that I pulled up. So here's one for Fish and Wildlife at the Jackson National Fish Hatchery in Wyoming. This was an interesting one. This is for the South Rim of the Grand Canyon. And what I found interesting is that it requires a minimum of 60 hours a week and a 6-month commitment. I'm like, who the heck's going to volunteer for 60 hours a week? So I'm hoping that's a typo, or they're looking at it as a couples thing in each. But even still, most volunteer jobs in the National Park Service looks at 32 hours a week. So you're working like 4 on, 4 off, or 4 8-hour days, which may seem like a lot, but it's fun. And again, it's just for a few months, so it's not a permanent thing. So this kind of shows that it does go through a lot of the things, the different sites of what they do. That doesn't cover everything. This one was interesting because it sounded like you were basically the eyes and ears of this area and kind of roam trails, basically did a lot of interpretation type things of providing information, education. And it did provide an RV site for you to park at. So you don't have to be just a campground host if you wanted to volunteer at a national. So the volunteer.gov website provides information for volunteer positions. It also has some positions listed for state parks. They may have them listed there. I've seen Idaho listed on there. I've seen a couple of others. You need to fill out an application. You apply for us, you click the apply button, you fill out the application. It's not a hard application, and it will save most of the information you put in there, which is great. Before they changed it, you had to re-enter it every time, like name, address, work, references and stuff. So it's nice that it saves it now. Always double check your application so you don't send something to Cedar Breaks that says I'd really like to work at Great Basin. So that may be another reason I wasn't chosen for Cedar Breaks. Make sure you have at least 3 work references they can get a hold of. Like I said, I sent one out and they can get a hold of one of my references, and they felt like that was a problem. So I changed that reference. They don't always remove the positions when they're filled on volunteer.gov. So I would look for more recent positions that have been posted recently rather than looking further back, or look at that, make sure, or just see if you can call them to see if they still have that position open or not, or email them. The thing with calling a park service like a national park is they don't always answer their phones. So, and most of the time it's because their phones don't work because they're in such a rural area. Not that they don't want to answer their phone or their email doesn't work, their computer system doesn't work. Rural areas have a hard time with that. I usually, when I apply, I send an email with my resume and kind of a little brief thing about me and why I'd like to work for them. And they're not always responsive in a timely manner. Right now, I've applied for 5 positions so far for this summer. I was turned down for Cedar Breaks. The North Rim of the Grand Canyon, the contact person is on furlough until March. So I'm not sure when I'll hear from them. One national forest site emailed me and said they'd get back to me in a couple of weeks, which was a couple of weeks ago. I haven't heard from them. One of them I've never heard from. One of them I've had an interview for, but they haven't gotten back to me. I have emailed them, but they haven't gotten back to me. So who knows? Maybe I'll have a place to go. Maybe I won't. So it's that go with the flow. Some other resources you can look at is state park sites. I'm going to go over a few of those. Looking at county and city parks, like San Diego County has a whole website that they have about volunteer positions in their campgrounds and stuff just for San Diego County. Workamper News may have volunteer positions. Indeed.com, they're more of a paid site, but sometimes they have volunteer. Facebook groups, there's a couple of work camping groups on Facebook. I don't know how great those are, or I'd be really careful applying for a job through them and make sure you got a good written contract and know what you're doing. Also, knowing someone is always helpful. So that's how I got my first campground job as a bed and breakfast cook. Is my best friend was the owner's cousin. She got me, my best friend got me the job. So every site's a little different. I got on Utah State Parks website. I looked for jobs and then volunteer. I couldn't find like just a volunteer site. So if you're looking at a site like a state park, if you can't find a volunteer button, maybe look under jobs or we're hiring or work for us or something like that. Nevada, I used the search button and typed in volunteer and then found some information. California state parks, I ended up using the search button for volunteer and then they had information. So if you're going to interview, if you're fortunate enough to finally have someone call and email you and say, let's set up an interview. These are questions I like to ask. My first question is, where's law enforcement and how long does it take them to get to me? Now, these aren't necessarily deal breakers for me. I just like to know because in my first position, law enforcement was 90 minutes away. And we had a lot of partiers and drinkers and people that like to be noisy and domestic disputes. I haven't had any problems camp hosting like that since. But that was a little, I don't know if I would do that again. That's always good to know. Most like in national parks and things that are closer to established areas, they either use the sheriff as a response, which is what we used in the national forest site. Unfortunately, like I say, they were 90 minutes away. Most national parks are closer to towns that have law enforcement. At Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, they were still like 40 minutes to an hour away. But I had law enforcement there that were EMTs and they could get there pretty quick. I would ask what the vibe of the campground is. If it's a party campground where people like to come up on the weekends and just get drunk and let loose, that may be fine. Like I say, that's not necessarily a deal breaker for me, but I just would want to know about it. It's not my favorite thing to do though. And they may not tell you the truth when you interview. You also want to know what support staff is available. A lot of places they have fee staff and they're the people that run the campground and make sure the reservations are done. Want to make sure they're available. How do you get a hold of them? Are they going to be readily available? What do you do after hours if they're not available? Is maintenance available? Do they respond quickly if you have a toilet that's plugged? Do you have to fix the toilet that's plugged? I've been known just to put up a sign that says campground closed or bathroom closed because I didn't want to deal with it, but they came quickly and fixed it. Knowing what other problems campground has, like my first camp host job, we had a lot of bears. Knowing that is nice to know so you can kind of prepare or it can kind of help you decide, no, I really don't want to chase bears out of the campground. There's people called squatters where they'll come in and try to get a campsite for free. or not pay for it. It's kind of nice to know if that's a big problem or not. My first job, it was kind of a problem. It had people generally in the national parks, they don't know how to pay or they came in late at night. But there's some people that just figure they can come in, camp for free and leave. It's just nice to know how big a problem that is and what do you do about it. I would make rounds in the morning and find someone that was like camping in the group site, and I would just knock on the window and say, camp host, better leave now or I'm calling law enforcement. And they would leave. So, because law enforcement wasn't there yet anyway. We need to know if you have a pet, if they're willing to have your pet there. So that's something to ask. And if they're going to train you, like how to use the radios, there's certain protocol that you need to use when you're using a radio. If they're going to go over forms with you, like how to register, rec.gov is usually the website that's used for reservations for federal agencies. So are they going to provide training on to you? Because that's a really ridiculous website and very hard to use. But it can be done. This picture is a site in Bryce Canyon. Unfortunately, this does not happen very often, but I was making morning rounds and doing checking registrations and saw this campground. And I had already talked to him the night before about problems they were doing. And so I just called law enforcement for him and had him wake him up and talk to him. I didn't even deal with this. They also had screwed eye bolts into the trees to hang a hammock from, which really, that's a big no-no. I figured I would just yell at them, so I let law enforcement take care of it. And they were perfectly willing to do that. Park service people are very helpful. We'll help you out. So other questions to ask are, what are your duties? Do you have to clean the bathrooms? I hate cleaning fire pits. General maintenance, are you responsible if there's a late night problem or not responsible? A lot of times you are, and you have very seldom, but it does happen. Have someone knock on your door like at midnight or 3 o'clock in the morning looking for a site or having a question or something. It doesn't happen too often though. Do you register campers? Do you collect fees? Most campgrounds I've worked in, I didn't have to collect fees. In fact, all of them, you just say, fill out the envelope, put the envelope in the Iron Ranger up at the entrance, and you don't have to touch the bunny. Want to know what your hours and days off are? A lot of times the camp hosting, you have like 4 days on, 4 days off, unless you're the only camp host. Then it may be like when I volunteered for the Forest Service, I was on 5 days, off 2 days. And that's the one I got paid a stipend for. You want to know what kind of site you have, where it is. Even if you're at Bryce Canyon, camp host is located away from the campers a bit, but you still get a lot of people coming up and asking questions. If you don't have electricity, you want to know, or even if you do have electricity, it's nice to know where you can get propane if it's fairly close by. Having a portable tank is nice, so you don't have to move your whole RV to fill your propane. If there's cell phone service or internet, if you have to have internet, like for whatever reason, and there isn't any, like Starlink works pretty good from what people have told me, or the dish systems, having some kind of satellite system, you can do that. Or you can just learn to live without it, which is really hard. This is a picture of Capitol Reef, and we had a turkey running around the campground for a while until they relocated. So the other jobs that you can volunteer for, mainly in the National Park Service, is what they call interpretation, or now they call them a park guide. And these are the information people. They interpret the area. You could also be a language interpreter also. Just have to be willing to, best thing is you have to answer the same question over and over and over again. And I'm not always great at that. So that's why I choose to be a camp host most of the time. Though interpretation's fun. The other thing they like you to do is keep track of how many people you talk to or see or come in the visitor center. That's a little hard for me to do. They give you a little clicker, and so you do need to do that. If you work at the visitor center desk, you can collect fees like entrance fees. You may be selling things. You may be providing a lot of information about the park, where they should visit, what they should do. You can do what they call roaming, where you're just kind of walking around and answering questions or initiating conversations if it looks like someone has a question. You can be doing tours of the area, like we at Pipe Spring. It's an old Mormon fort, so it was built in the 1870s, and we would do tours of the fort and take them throughout the fort, or just, well, it was during COVID, so they would just came into the fort and we would just let them roam around. But we would be there to answer questions. There's living history, where you can get to dress up and pretend you're a pioneer. This is me and my great niece during our centennial celebration at Pipe Spring. I only had the dress on until we got the picture, and then we changed. And no one else dressed up that day. I was kind of disappointed, but I knew she was coming in her pioneer dress. It's a Utah thing. You can do animal care, like say at Pipe Spring. I did a lot of animal care. You get to do demonstrations and presentations. At Pipe Spring, I learned how to make hard cheese with a cheese press and did a couple of demonstrations on that. If you're into research and learning about an area, this is a great way to do it if that's your thing. And because the park or monument may have access to documents and artifacts and books that just aren't available other places about that area. So being able, I've worked with volunteers that's what they love to do. And this one couple were trying to hit a new monument or park to learn about it every couple of months. And just because they love learning about history, and it was a great way to do it. And then you can do other duties as assigned. At Pipe Spring, I inventoried all the costumes. I cleaned up the volunteers' uniform closet. If they needed something else done, I just helped out. So if you're going to be an interpreter or work as the information side, or even if you're going to be like a maintenance volunteer or trail roaming, I kind of want to know what housing's available, are pets okay, are duties rotated through the day. I can't imagine anything worse than working at the visitor center for 8 hours. So fortunately, they would, at least at Pipe Springs, they would break up the day. So we'd do a couple of tours, would work in the visitor center for a couple of hours. We may do some roaming for a couple of hours. They would give us time to prepare demonstrations. We may be doing demonstrations during the day. So you're not stuck in one place for the full 8 hours. Make sure they're going to provide training. They're going to provide research material or training materials. That they're going to provide time to learn that information, because you have to learn a lot of stuff about that area, like the history, trails. Are they going to provide time for you to go hike the trails? Is there staff available? And who's your supervisor, and can you get a hold of them? So that's always important to know, or kind of let them know that that's important. And that's the end. Any questions? I was asked here if my medical background, if they ever relied on it. Generally, if there's a serious problem, they want you to get Park Service personnel there. I did have like a 2-year-old that they came knocking on my door saying the 2-year-old couldn't breathe and was swelling. The baby was having a reaction to something. And as a nurse, I wanted help there with a child, an infant like that, or a toddler. Called law enforcement before I even went to assess the baby, because I knew they'd be like 10 minutes away. They were there within 5 minutes. By the time I got to the baby and looked at the baby and said, well, it's crying, I think we're okay, it's not like horrible, I had law enforcement there. So generally, they like to take care of any major problems. Most campers take care of their own problems. If they have a sprain, if they get injured, they take care of it themselves. They're resourceful people. We did have at Capitol Reef a person that showed up in a car that they said they'd fallen on the trail and passed out, and they didn't know how long they'd been up there. They were kind of worried about him. He had some stomach pain. And because we were an hour and a half away from the hospital, we called the ranger on the radio. The other camp host was also a retired nurse. And we had the family meet the ambulance in Torrey, which was outside of the national park. And they took him to Richfield, which was, like 90 minutes away or so by ambulance. And he ended up having like a ruptured spleen or something. So I was very glad that we just take you. So, but generally, I think it helps me stay calmer because I don't get as excited, but I still get kind of nervous during emergency things.
Jim Boone has a question. He wants to know if there's options for people without RVs.
Some places will take tents, but I don't see that a lot on the Workamper sites or what I've looked on volunteer.gov. I think most places want self-contained units. But there may be some things that are out there. And if you're doing like backcountry or something, volunteering as a backcountry person, and they do have volunteer positions for that. Or they may be able to provide housing for you.
So it sounds like you've been doing these for about 6-7 years. How many different sites have you done?
Did the cook thing at the bed and breakfast for 2 summers. I did Great Sand Dunes for 2 summers during COVID. the 2 summers of COVID, which was pretty nice because I was outside and didn't get sick. I've done a spring and a summer at Capitol Reef and a summer at Bryce Canyon. Yeah, so about 4 different. Oh, and then this summer from hell at the National Forest campsite.
Jim had another question. He wants to know what you do during your off season.
Well, I just bought a place here in Mesquite, so I've just enjoyed being in the warm weather, having a home. Oh, and I've been volunteering here at Friends of Gold Butte. The last 2 winters I spent at Pipe Spring working as an interpretive volunteer, which after those 2 winters in my RV, I was kind of done with it. And before that, I had friends and family that took me in. One of the people asked me here if I had a lot of problems with unruly people or felt in danger. Generally, I'm bossy enough that I don't feel that way. The first summer, there may have been 1 or 2 times, but things seemed to work out okay. That by summer from hell, my first summer as a camp host was just interesting, and I learned a lot. And I learned more how to go with the flow. So if it's bad, I just leave. But I've never really felt in danger. Generally, campers are pretty nice people, or people that are visiting, outside recreating. Someone asked if there's opportunities like this in the East, and there are. I see more in the West. It's more like interpretation and living history type things in the East. Maybe more events like a cleaning day or a trails day or some kind of event type thing, living history. I'm sure that like state parks, county parks have volunteer opportunities back east. I'm just more of a Western gal. Yeah, in different places. I know like in Arches, the camp host also, we talked to someone from Arches that was a camp host over there, and they had a cabin that they could stay in. So it just depends on the area and what's available. A lot of times I know like at Pipe Spring, because I was thinking of asking for housing there, but they didn't allow pets in the housing. So, and I have a dog, so I was kind of stuck in the RV.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and thank Marjean very much for presenting for us this evening, and thank the Peanut Gallery for being kind of quiet while we present, and let you all go and enjoy your evening. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.